Klispera. Thank you all for coming today. My name is Dimitra. I'm the one who has sent you numerous emails. So thank you all. Before we begin, I would like to have the Hull-House people kind of wave their hands in the back. That is Jennifer, Lauren, and Margaret from Hull-House. They have been part of a larger program called Making the West Side here with us at the National Hellenic Museum, and lots of partners here on the West Side. So with their support, we've been able to put this program together for you. Now, with that being said, let me give you kind of a scope and layout of this event, because it's a little bit of a different event than what we traditionally do here at the museum. We will start with the wonderful James Manolacos from Hellenic Pastry Shop, who's right over here. And then we will open up the discussion to the audience to come up and share your own memories. You can share a recipe, an artifact, or just an anamnesi, right? A memory that you have. In the back there's a table near the window facing mousses. There's a complete digitizing station there. So if you would like us to digitize anything, after you're done with your story, you are welcome to go to the back. And we have two ladies who will be back there to help you scan in the artifact, and it will be put onto an online database. Secondly, the whole event will be recorded. So there are consent forms in the back if you want to be recorded. But the beauty of this is that 20 years, 30 years down the line, if your kids or grandkids wish to watch this, you'll have the link to this. So if you registered with an email, which means you got many emails from me, you will get that link to the video at the end, okay? If you walked in today, we are glad you came and joined us, but please leave your email with myself or Caitlin Johnson, who is in the lobby, with one of us before you leave so we can get that video recording to you. Sound good? Yeah. All right, without further ado, let's give a round of applause to James Manolacos.
Oh, this one?
Good evening.
Klispera.
Klispera as well. First of all, I'd like to thank Dimitra and everybody here at the National Hellenic Museum for having me, and the people at Hull-House for doing something that is, I think, essential for, in general, the West Side and for Greektown. I wanted to start this off since, well, first of all, I own a pastry shop across the street. It's a family business. We've been there since 1974. My sister and I have taken it over since the passing of our dad, which was 3.5 years ago. Well, we've been running it for the last 5. We're also probably, for all intents and purposes, the last products of this neighborhood. Meaning that we've grown up in it. We've never lived. When you have a business like this, you essentially live in it. Some of you may know what I'm talking about. Our house was never here, but it's always been home. So, you know, this commercial district is a remnant of what's left of the old Greek area across where the highway is now at the old Delta. You know, there weren't any kids. We were the last ones, really, who kind of grew up in it. I went to high school at Ignatius. You know, I went to UIC. I started at UIC, I should say. So I'm happy that things like this have been kind of, that little historical pieces like this are taking place, because it's really necessary to preserve something that's really slowly, especially with the gentrification of the West Side, kind of fading away, as things do. But I digress. Let me go back to what we were saying at the beginning. I own a pastry shop. Now, we are part of a long line of pâtissiers, which is what we do for the most part, bakers and confectioners of Greek descent here in the US. If you go back to the beginning, to the turn of the last century, I was doing some research. 70% of all confectionaries, soda fountains, and pushcart grocers, so everything essentially relating to food, were owned or operated by Greeks. Small businesses, yeah? And then as time went on, they more or less converted. Either that went out of fashion or it got big and industrialized, and then they went into restaurants. And we still find ourselves more towards the end of that phase, I would say. The ones that didn't wear suit and ties stayed in restaurants. Everybody else got regular jobs, I guess. Why? That's always been a big question, right? I mean, there's so many of us that are involved in this sort of business. You want to say that stereotypes don't exist, but at the end of the day, sometimes they're true. I found a really nice quote from 1922, and I wanted to share it with you. So it goes, "We are not ordinary people. We are progressive and ambitious. We were not satisfied merely to have something to eat every day and get by. We wanted to accomplish things. We wanted financial independence, pride, independence, and money. All those things go together. When somebody else tells you what to do, you lose your pride." That was said by a man named George Sideris, and he made ice cream. It kind of sums it up in a nutshell, and if you look a little bit deeper into it, you'll see that it's both the good and the bad of us. The first immigrants were always entrepreneurs, and if you look historically, the one, in my opinion, the only good thing that the Ottoman Empire did for Greeks was it kind of left them alone. At the end of the day, as long as you pay taxes, you can, get about and do what you wanted. So there was no indentured servitude. If you look at the north of Europe, in order to get over here in the 17th and 18th century, it was basically feudalism. It was a fiefdom. You worked for somebody else, and you lived and died by their own whims. The Greeks didn't really have it that way. They can do what they wanted. And that continued on. There's a sense of independence that way that allowed them to come over and essentially start their own businesses because they didn't know how to operate any other way. Now that leads also to the bad part of that, the bad part of the quote. Pride, independence. As time went on, confectionaries, candy, chocolates became more industrialized. They needed to be able to serve a larger amount of people. Pride and independence sometimes hinders people from working together. Another, I'd say, very classic characteristic of our ethnicity, of people not being able to work together. So they stayed small. If they couldn't stay small and survive, they did. Some sold off to bigger companies. Some just let it go. Like I said, their kids went on, became educated, and left the whole food thing behind. But as diners took over and people started opening restaurants with newer immigrants, they were able to again tend that fire of doing something independently and also serving another part of the ethnicity, which is the estiasis part of it. I mean, we're the type of people who are giving. A Greek has you into his home, you're going to get something. To kerasma. It's a big deal. I mean, that's kind of what keeps us in business, really. And it all ties into this whole thing with confectioners wanting to make something better than somebody else, because you'll remember them. They actually wanted to make people happy. So that'll tie me into to our own store. And my father's pride in coming up with a recipe is the chocolate macaroon, the Louis cookie, as he named it, because he was so humble and he named it after himself. And a lot of them did that. There was no qualms about it whatsoever. He was proud of it. He was competitive. He watched people eat it. He would give it to them and say, "Try it," and they'd be like, "Okay, I'll put it in a bag." No, you're going to try it now, because he wanted to see their face when they liked it. It's really something. That really brings me to the end of that bit. What it means to me to have this store. I grew up in it, like I said. This neighborhood is not what it was I've gotten to the age where I can say it wasn't what it was in the 80s. It was a lot more fun. It was a lot more lively. There was a lot more people. The restaurants were packed every night. People were waiting outside. They were giving them shots of ouzo just to keep them in line so they don't go somewhere else. I remember this, and people would, Parthenon, there was a line almost to the corner, almost on a nightly basis, and people would kind of flow into the store because we're next door. So there I am as a little kid. John Cass said it best. It's called Greek daycare, when your parents just, bring you to work. And just keep you in a corner, basically. It worked out all right, because you mean people, and everybody was super, super nice, maybe because they were drunk. But you keep these. This is the kinds of things that you keep from, especially businesses like mine that are small, and you get to meet your customers and you meet their kids, and now we have their grandkids coming in. It becomes a legacy in a certain way. Even though, for me, it wasn't my favorite thing. Our actual house was on the southwest side by Midway. I grew up off of Pulaski. And when I was little, Dove candies was still around. And Cubans. Yeah, Cubans is still around. But Dove, I remember the old store on 60th place. 57. Was it 57? All right. I was on 63rd. But by the age of 7 or 8, I was allowed to leave the block. So you would go there, and I remember it was the same sense of pride. Mike, which is the son of the original owner, who's also a customer of mine now and a really cool guy. It wasn't like the Dove bar that you buy in a store. It was a massive block. Yeah, you couldn't eat it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was a massive block of ice cream, and dipped in this chocolate. It was just. Yeah, right? Yeah, it was impressive stuff, and I think we were just so good at it because he was so good at it because this is like a home recipe. There was no cutting corners. The idea of profit margins just didn't get into the equation. If there's lines out the door, what do you care about that? You know what I mean? And then after a while, I remember I was still little when they sold, but I was really happy that I could just go down to the corner and get it at Osco. But it was a completely different product because all of a sudden, costs and profit margins and bottom lines came into the equation. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was the only one left. So he passed it on to the entire world. So far, we've passed it on to 3 generations of customers. Pride more than anything else keeps me from changing the recipe, even though we've been approached to mass produce this thing. But the idea of financial independence and money are starting, as I get older and more mature, play a larger role in my decision making. So maybe we'll see it on shelves soon, and that way it'll become a legacy that'll go into perpetuity if other people like what we make. We're not the only ones. It's nice to be part of a very long line of Greeks who came over and really made their mark, yeah? Especially when it came to foods. Temptation, Margie's, Cupid, Dove. There's many more that I can't even list. And that's just sweet stuff. Even in foods, Billy Goat. All these things, they're simple things, but they resonate with people. And I'm not proud of a lot of things that we are in general. I'm pretty critical of ethnicity as a general, overall, but I'm proud of this fact that we resonate and we've been able to establish ourselves in such a positive and warm way. And I guess I can open it up now. No? Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks. I can take questions if there are any. That's good. That means I said everything I wanted. Yes.
I have a question. Since you're in the bakery business, I just wonder, not that the Greeks used pineapple that much, but what's happened to pineapple? You can't get pineapple pies or any kind of pineapple anymore. Is there something going on that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of. Essentially we deal with mostly Greek recipes, so we never dealt with pineapple to begin with.
Right.
No, I don't know.
Right, okay.
Sorry.
It's something like chocolate sodas. That used to be my favorite thing.
Yeah.
Chocolate ice cream sodas. They've disappeared too.
That's true.
If you live long enough, everything changes.
Well, it changes or it just falls out of style or, people just don't go for it. I don't know.
Okay, thanks.
Do we have any other questions for James? Oh.
His new generation, the last generation for people to go in the pastry business. Do you think your children will continue it?
Maybe. I think we've gotten over the hump of to work with your hands is a bad thing. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, my grandparents were farmers. My parents worked with their hands. I wasn't really groomed for this. I have a master's degree, but circumstances bring you back into it. And I worked for somebody else, and I hate it. So all of a sudden I work a lot more. I really don't have much of a life outside of this, unfortunately. But I'm much happier, even though, just because I don't have to answer anybody. And you become a bit the master of your own destiny. So you get over the taboo of, oh, having a restaurant or working with your hands, doing manual labor, working so many hours is a bad thing. Which is, especially with first generation Greeks, it really hangs over their heads and puts a lot of pressure on people to do 5 different things. Instead of opening it up and just do something really well that you'd like to do it smart. Do you know what I mean? So maybe, I mean, we'll see.
How have you changed the shop now to the market that's in the neighborhood, or any changes?
Yes, and good question. Our customer base used to be split. There used to be non-Greeks who came into the neighborhood to eat, and Greeks. It was about, I'd say 60-40, 60 for the Greeks. And Greeks in general just buy. I think we're bad consumers. In my case, they're great consumers. But on the other side of the bench, it's, you know, just give me 5 pounds of this, 4 pounds of that, 3 pounds of that. There's no how much is this, you know, oh, I don't need that many, you know, I'm putting on weight. It's just put, how much you want, take. Which is awesome, you know, especially if you're doing a good job. And people, and at least they're critical in the way that if you don't do a good job, they're going to hold you to it. And people came back, and they still come back. Those generations of kind of, as Greeks become, you know, we assimilate easily. I think by second generation, it's almost done. So now it's a bit more, what's, for lack of a better term, the yuppie that's, you know, predominates in the West loop. It's like, I'll have one of these cookies. Oh, maybe. Do you have a smaller portion of baklava? It's like, are you serious, man? Yeah. But that's how it works. You know, the word before, you know, let's just say it's much better and cost effective if you're buying in bulk. So, you know, prices are different based on if you're going to buy 1 or if you're going to buy 20 or whatever. You know, so that's come into effect. That's changed. We're lucky that we have a lot of recipes, especially the macaroons, that are natural. They're naturally and always have been gluten-free. So all of a sudden, we're selling 3 times as many. Because 3 times as many people have allergies all the time.
All of a sudden.
Yeah. So, you know, being that we're young and we're flexible and we can change, lets this place survive. I think if my parents had it, and they're in their 60s and 70s, they'd be a bit more, and I see other businesses that are kind of closing. It's run by older folks who can't really, you know, manipulate what's happening around them for the betterment of their business. And they get lost.
Do you have a Pokemon at your business?
We did. What happened when you put it?
Σε ευχαριστούμε πολύ για την παρουσίαση. Thank you so much.
Να είστε καλά.
Very much. Now, I've tried your moussaka and your pasticcio,
Yeah.
and it was amazing.
Thanks.
Are you going to expand on other recipes?
Yeah, our problem has been, we're getting to the point now, luckily, where space is an issue. We'll have to slowly expand our business. Like I said, for us, I think another general characteristic of first generation Greek Americans is not to take too much of we're risk averse, because if you fall on your face, it doesn't matter what society thinks, but you'll hear it at home. So you take baby steps, you know.
And you're going to expand with more seating,
We'd like to do more
table,
food.
and food. Yeah.
I think more the savory bit is where the future lies. People are a bit more careful. We use fantastic ingredients because, I mean, you can only eat so much sugar. I don't eat a lot of it. Because it's just bad for you if you have too much. You know what I mean? So we use as fine ingredients as we possibly can because our conscience is keen. And then if we do more foods, and Greek foods are fantastic on their own. You know, they're healthy. As long as they're done right. So we want to expand more into that sector. And I think we're doing it at a good pace. Pretty soon, I think we should be able to bring out more products and larger quantities of them. Not just to our store, but maybe just to get out and go into other stores. Thank you.
Thank you, James, again.
Yeah, thank you very much.
That was story number 1. Now I turn to you, and I'm going to slowly invite you up to share your stories. If you are not comfortable sharing your story with the larger audience, Margaret's going to wave her hand in the back. She also has audio recorders, and she would be happy to take you to another quieter room to record it as well. So if you are interested in that, you are welcome to see her either during this time or immediately after this portion of the event. And don't forget, if you are sharing, she has a scanner in the back as well to scan those artifacts for you. With that being said, do we have someone who would like to come up? I saw her hand first, Linda. Now you're welcome to use this or go to the podium. Okay.
Hello. Are you able to hear me? Okay. My name is Nancy Burrows, and I brought an item that's actually right in keeping with what you were talking about. This is a cookbook that I brought, and it's called What's Cooking in Indiana Harbor. I have a question to start out. How many of you have ever heard of Indiana Harbor? Okay, some of you. And how many of you have heard of it, but you really think about it as East Chicago, Indiana? Okay, well, we would boo you back there for that. My father's family was from Indiana Harbor. They were very definite that it was Indiana Harbor, not East Chicago. It was a very interesting place. Back during Prohibition, it was where Al Capone went to play cards and to drink. It had there was a lot of gambling there, and I think there still is actually a lot of gambling there. It's an interesting place because if you walk through that town, you see churches and there were synagogues, and the cornerstone of these different buildings leads you to the waves of immigration that came into this country and into the Midwest. So it's a very interesting who's who. And back in the day, people actually got along very well, and it was pretty common for people to know multiple languages, at least enough to get by. So fast forwarding a little bit, my mother gave me a cookbook when I got married in the early 70s. And this was a cookbook that I think was from the 50s, actually, and it's called What's Cooking in Indiana Harbor. So when I look at the back of the cookbook, the company has the street address. The phone number is HY, which was probably Hyde Park 32615, Chicago. There were no area codes. The address has no zip code. If you wanted to purchase additional copies of the cookbook, it started out that you would order it through the gift counter chairman of Sisterhood B'nai Israel, and these were $2 a copy that you spent on the cookbook, and it asked for you to please include postage. It did not have a handling fee. My favorite part of the cookbook, and it's still a go-to cookbook for me, and you can see what my favorite part is probably because it's with the stained pages. By the way, the cookbook is barely held together anymore, but it's the baking section of the cookbook. And when I look at the recipes, which I've kind of taken for granted, I realize there's no such thing as margarine in these cookbooks. It's all about sugar, and it's all about lovely, lovely ingredients to them. And there are wonderful cakes and other recipes in it. The women who gave recipes to this cookbook are known as, in most cases, it's like Mrs. Jerry Rothstein or Mrs. Harry Tarler or Mrs. Cecil Cohen. They didn't have names of their own. A couple did. Those were the widow ladies, I think, who did. but the recipes are really marvelous. And when I use this cookbook, I still go back over memory lane. I occasionally, living in the south suburbs, I meet some people who were relatives of some of the people whose recipes are in the cookbook. And I will say, oh, I've heard of your grandmother or your mother or someone, and it's pretty exciting to do that. I find that I use the cookbook a lot. I certainly use it if I'm feeling nostalgic, if there is an especially happy occasion with my children. I will often go back to this cookbook and bake a recipe from it. And by the same token, if there's a sad occasion and I want to pull my family in some way, then this is the go-to cookbook that I will use to find a recipe that brings me back to it. The smells in some of the kitchens of some of these women who contributed recipes, I can still sense those smells, and they bring back some of the fondest memories. I believe that it is aroma and the sense of smell that is really the earliest memory that most of us have. Sometimes it might not be a real good memory. I remember going into apartment buildings and smelling, like a lot of cabbage coming from it, not necessarily a good smell, but the baking smells, they just can't be beat. So this is my go-to cookbook, and some of the recipes I think are beautiful. Will I pass them on to my children? I think so, probably not in this form. It will probably be in a much more digital form than the cookbook. But I think that they hold some of the memories pretty close to them as well. Thank you for letting me share this.
Thank you for sharing. Now, I think so Linda's hand second. When I first asked, is everyone okay to let Linda come on up? All right, Linda, the floor is yours. Woo!
Ευχαριστώ. Klispera. My name is Linda, and I am part of the adult Greek school here at the National Hellenic Museum. And I want to thank Miss Dimitra for taking good care of us. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And my sweet memory is American Greek salad. My mother was Greek, but my father was not. None of us 4 kids had the Greek palate. We did not like lamb, olives, tomates, baklava, or feta cheese. Ohi, ohi, ohi. But we did love my mom's Greek salad, which she Americanized for us. The recipe, like all great recipes, is very simple. Get the freshest, most beautiful tomatoes you can find. This is the key. You also need romaine lettuce, cucumber, oregano, salt, the best red wine vinegar, Greek olive oil, and crusty bread. Greek bread is the best. Then what you do is wash and dry your vegetables, you chop up your tomatoes, you put them in a deep bowl, and then you cover the tomatoes with red wine vinegar, and you put in like a pinch of salt and oregano, and you let that marinate while you chop up your cucumbers and your romaine lettuce. And this is also very important. You take the crusty Greek bread, and before you do that, you stream in the olive oil and you whisk your dressing. And my family likes more vinegar than olive oil. And so then you take the bread and then you taste it and you adjust your seasonings and then you throw in the cucumber and the salad and then you toss and enjoy. Opa! And of course, our palates have finally improved, so sometimes we add feta cheese as well as Kalamata olives, red onion, and green pepper. I have passed this recipe on to my son. I know that my mother and all past generations would be so proud that a family tradition continues. And I would like to give a shout out to Hull-House because without your help, my mother's family would have had a really, really hard time during the Depression. So thank you all.
Thank you, Linda, and everyone who has shared so far. Who would like to go next? Start hand there. Catherine? Would you like to start?
Hello, everyone. My name is Kathy Rubus, and I'm one of the docents here at the museum. I've been here since it opened at this location about 4.5 years now, and I love it. I absolutely love it. I'm of Greek descent. My dad was born in Greece, and I don't think you'll be able to see this picture, but I have a picture of my dad in an apron and a hat. When he first came from Greece in about 1934, he was 17 years old, and he went to work for a gentleman by the name of Bill Vasilakos, who owned Homan Confectionery on 26 in Homan, which is a little village now, I believe. And he learned the trade there, but he didn't end up in the confectionery business. He opened up a restaurant on 51st in California. And his brother came from Greece shortly after that and went on 51st and Hermitage. And then his sister came and they were on 51st and Damon. So we had all of 51st Street taken. My dad, and they were short order places. They weren't like Parthenon or anything like that. It wasn't Greek food. Very proud of my dad, what he accomplished and everything. He came when he was 17 years old, but if you talked to him when he was in his 90s, he passed now, you would have thought he just got off the boat. After all those years working at the confectionery, he still said chuckle instead of chocolate. He still said strawberry pie or pineapple pie. That's the way they talked, and we always giggled, even though we heard it a million times already. The gentleman, Bill Vasilakos, who first gave him his big break, ended up, I won't say which year, being my godfather. And that's the bond that connected us back then. So he was my godfather. And what I love about tonight is that I reconnected with my godsister, who I talked to once in the last too many years. About 10 years ago was the last time I talked to her. And I found her on Facebook, emailed her, and she couldn't come tonight, but I couldn't remember the name of the confectionery. So that's kind of a sweet memory for me. And James was talking about Greek daycare. There's two pictures here of my niece and nephew. My niece she's holding a big fake ice cream cone, and they did spend a lot of time at our restaurant. And then I have memories of with the cousins. We had 26 cousins total on both sides of the family. And my sister was born 3 years before me, but her birthday was a day before mine. So we always had big birthday parties and everything with lots of sweets and everything. So I have this museum could be called my museum because up in immigration is my dad's story too, when he first came from Greece and what it was like. He came to the train station in Chicago from New York. 3 men met him there, and he looked at the wrong man and said, "Are you my father?" This is what they sacrificed back then. He hadn't seen his father in so long because he was here making a living to slowly bring the family over. So they led a hard life, but they led a good life too. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kathy. Okay. Does anyone have another memory or story that they would like to share? Yes, ma'am. You get your choice of microphone.
My name is Nancy Plaques. I live close by in the Southwater Market produce buildings. And I came tonight with no memories, but all of a sudden they came out. So I figured I might as well share what I have. And the nice woman that's sitting in front of my husband owned Ideal Candies. So we started speaking. I said, oh my God, years ago our neighbor was an accountant next door to a candy store on Ashland Avenue, which he reminded us was Universal Candies. And I remember he taking us in the back, and there were these amazing, huge copper big bowls, I guess, where they would, kettles, where they would do what? Tell me. Make the candy out? Make the candy in it. They were gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. So that's memory number one. Memory number two is Dove Candies over on Pulaski. We lived in Beverly for 25 years, and we were married in 1983, and we were renovating our house, and we had our marriage was on the front lawn. Our refrigerator was in the garage because we were doing renovating our kitchen. So the only thing that we had in our refrigerator was in the freezer, and they were the Dove candy bars that we would go over there with a big cooler. And if I recall, they were much larger. And weren't they on like a piece of wax paper or something? Yeah. Yes, exactly.
They dipped them, then put them on wax paper, and then all the chocolate would migrate down to the bottom and make a base almost twice the size of the brick.
Right. So at our wedding, we, my cousin was a chocoholic, my cousin Miriam from Memphis, Tennessee, and they were driving back after our wedding. I said, Miriam, you're a chocoholic, come to my freezer. And we gave her Dove bars to take home on the trip. Last memory is, I'm from St. Louis. My father managed a shoe store in St. Charles, Missouri, which was a small little town, was the first capital of Missouri. And as a child growing up in the 50s and early 60s, I would come and help him out on the weekend or like at a sidewalk sale. But my big thrill was to walk over to the Woolworths, go to the candy counter. It was hardwood floors, wooden floors, and ceiling fans, wooden ceiling fans, and I would come out with a half a pound of chocolate-covered raisins. So today, marrying my husband, I think that's, well, his downfall is dark chocolate, but and ice cream, but my downfall is chocolate-covered raisins. Those are my memories.
Okay. Is there anyone else who would like to come up? Lauren?
So, hi, my name is Lauren, and I'm the Associate Director over at Jane Addams Hull-House Museum on 800 Hull South Halstead, right down the street. I wasn't quite sure if I was going to do this, but when I kept on thinking about the theme, it kind of made me think about my family, because I live far away from them. So I'm not Greek, I'm not from Chicago, although I have spent time in the Midwest before I moved here. I went to school in Ohio. I'm actually from a small New England college town in Massachusetts called Amherst. Oh, good. I'm like, please, somebody know where it is. And anyway, so I am of mixed heritage. So my father is African American, and my mother is of Eastern European Jewish descent. And I grew up with a mother who didn't really cook much. She only cooked like maybe one thing, and that was like fish chowder, and then everything else was left to my father. Even the Jewish food, my father took over slowly. So he makes really good matzo ball soup, if anybody wants to know. My mother used to say that like Jewish, like the way he makes matzo balls is the way like Jewish mothers like across around the world have been wanting to make matzo balls, and somehow he achieved like the best consistency or something. But that's not what my memory is about. My memory comes from my mother's side of the family, and like James, my mother's mother has a background in Montreal and moved to the US from Montreal. Her parents, my great-grandparents, grew up in the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, moved to Montreal. Actually, they came to Baltimore first, and then they went to Montreal. I'm not quite sure how that happened. They're no longer alive, obviously, so I can't ask those questions. And they ended up having 10 children, of which my grandmother was one of them. And there's only one left of that group, my Uncle Perry, who's still up in Montreal. And my grandmother was the only one of the siblings who came down to the United States. And she came down because she married my grandfather, my Papa Leo, who I'm named after. And my grandmother's name is Belle, and one of my nephews is named after her. So Belle was, unlike my mother, a really good baker and a really good cook. And I have somebody had mentioned olfactory memories, so like the smell memories that you have, and I have really strong olfactory memories related to her and to her food. And she was able to pass down a couple of things to my mother that I believe her mother passed down to her, because they're variations on things that her mother grew up probably making or eating in Austria. And I emailed my mother this morning and I asked her to send me the recipes, and I wanted her to scan the original recipe cards, and instead, because she's a modern woman now, she instead typed it into her Samsung tablet and emailed it to me. And I was like, but I wanted the pretty recipe cards with like my grandmother's handwriting, and it didn't happen. So there are two. One is strudel, and the other is mandelbrot, but we always grew up calling it mundelbread. So we bastardized the German. And so the strudel is something that Annie Bauman-Fishman, who is my great-grandmother, passed down to Belle Monson, my grandmother. And now every Thanksgiving, my sister and my mother make that together. And it doesn't look like the normal strudel that you see kind of sold in pastry shops. It's completely different. I actually thought that all strudel looked like that strudel until I saw the strudel that they sell in pastry shops. So there's no like flaky crust or any of that. I can't really quite describe it, but it's a wet dough from what I understand. I've never been allowed to make it. Or even go near it, actually, in the kitchen, because my sister won't allow it. She's older than me. But inside of it is coconut, some type of fruit jam, and most importantly, Turkish delight. There has to be Turkish delight in it, and it has to be a certain type of Turkish delight. I believe it has to be the rosewater Turkish delight. It can't be any other flavor of Turkish delight, but it has to be Turkish delight. And there was a time when all of a sudden we couldn't really find any in the Boston area, and my sister was living in Brooklyn, and she found one Middle Eastern grocer that sold the exact type of Turkish delight that my grandmother used. And then the other one is the mundelbread, or the mandelbrot, that my mother specializes in and that my brother Herbie loves. And my mother will make it only for him now, and he'll eat at least 2 bars of it, if not more, and then take the rest home to his family in New Jersey. But he will literally sit in a corner eating it all day. The rest of us kind of think it's really dry, because it's kind of like a, I can't even think. Yeah, it's like a biscotti. Yeah, it's definitely like a biscotti. Yeah. And that one is something that my Nana Belle made, but my mother took over. And I also have very strong memories. And actually, now that I'm talking, I have like memories of the smell of it baking in the oven in both households. And I have usually, I think, around these types 2 baked goods stories about my grandmother, and particularly about my grandmother. And I think this was like the one time when usually things are baking that I would ask my mother questions about my Nana's family as well as my great-grandmother's family and where they were from and who they were, because I obviously didn't grow up knowing them. And I'm going to end this by saying that recently I was in Europe doing some traveling for vacation, and I went to a small city in Austria called Linz. And Linz is where, supposedly, rumor has it, we don't know, that where my great-grandmother and possibly my great-grandfather, who she married, were from. And so I was able to go to the small city where I have heritage and see where they came from. And I think the minute I went to the Jewish Community Center there, which is just like a one-building house that has like very, very tiny archive, because most of the Jewish community there was destroyed during Kristallnacht in 1938. And Linz, by the way, also holds the not so great distinction of being Hitler's hometown. I didn't find that out until I was there. So I just kind of like to think about it as that's the place where my family's from, not where that dude was from. But anyways, so, and I remember just like standing there over the summer, and I think literally I feel like the smell of like the mandel bread and of the strudel just like rose up in me as I was standing at the Jewish Community Center and also in front of the new synagogue that replaced the old synagogue, and I just thought of them at that moment. So that's my memory of baked goods and food and immigration. So thank you for listening.
These have been fantastic stories, haven't they? Stories that we often don't have time to share or time to reflect on. And with that last moment, I'm going to ask one last time if anyone else would like to come up and share a story. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Darlene Graff. My maiden name is Kefalis. I don't know if anybody here is aware of the old neighborhood on the south side, Roseland. Anybody? Except on the news now for not so good things. My dad was a candy maker, and he came over from Greece. He was born in 1898, and I think he was 17 or so when he came here. And he opened, it was called the Hollywood Grill. It was on 110th in Michigan. And actually, what's really funny about that, the address to the Hollywood Grill is 11016 South Michigan. Where I live now, I live at 11016 South Valley Court. So when we bought the house, we didn't know that was the address, so it was just kind of funny how it worked out. But anyway, so he had a restaurant on the corner. It was kind of like Al's on Happy Days, kind of like that, a hamburger joint with the jukebox and, you know, the whole bit. And there used to be a lot of high school kids that came in there after school, and just like Happy Days, kind of. We didn't have a Potsy or a Fonzie, but, you know, you couldn't start the jukebox by hitting it. But anyway, so then there was a movie theater next door called the State Theater. And on the other side of the State Theater, my dad had a candy store called Paulette's. And my mother's name, his name was Paul, my mom's name was Pauline. So he told her he was going to put her name in lights one day, so the candy store was Paulette's. Close enough. So he used to make the candy in the basement of the restaurant, and then he would hand dip the candy. He would make caramel corn. There was a gigantic table, I remember, it was probably about a foot thick, and he would make the caramel corn in the big copper kettle, lay it out, let it harden, and then they would break it up and put it in buckets. And my brother Jim and my dad used to load it up and take it 2 doors down next to the movie theater at Paulette's. And then he would make, I remember he used to make the Easter bunnies at Easter. And they were solid chocolate, you know, not the half bunny at Fannie Mae or the hollow ones. And it was solid chocolate. And he used to make one that was about this high. and that would be in front of the store. I don't think I could bite the ears off of that one, but they used to wrap it in cellophane and tie it off by the ears, you know, with a ribbon. And there was a lot of teeth marks and a lot of bunnies that he had to melt down and redo. So anyway, but anyway, I have a picture of the Hollywood Grill, which, as I said, was on 110th in Michigan. And that was one picture, and this was the other part with the soda fountain over here. And they had ice cream and milkshakes and, you know, all of those kinds of banana splits, all the good stuff. And these booths right here, they're smaller booths, but they were, right now they're in my cousin's basement. And so they did salvage that out of there. But during a time in the 50s and stuff, it was a very popular place. My mother was a waitress there. My dad, like I said, they made hamburgers and, you know, the usual fare. I remember there was one little older lady used to come in. She kind of reminded me of Granny on Tweety. You know Granny? You know who she is. So she used to come in and she'd sit there all day because she had no family. She would sit in that same booth all day long, and she had the little hat, you know, like Granny. And she would sit there and just have lunch there and dinner there. And many times I fell asleep in the booths, of course. We lived across the street in an apartment building. So I would do homework at the restaurant, you know, again, Greek daycare, and fall asleep in the booth, and then they would wake me up and I would go home. And I said one time I used to get into the movie theater free. I fell asleep in the movie theater. They didn't see me because I was a little small. Not that I'm that much bigger now, but I was asleep in the chair, and I wake up and everybody's gone. It's all dark. And it was all glass doors though in the front, and the restaurant was on one side, the candy store was on the other, and I'm over at the door. Help me. So they did call somebody to get me out of there. But, or I could have still been there today. But anyway, so I want to thank you for letting me share this with you, and I hope you have the rest of the evening a good night. Thank you.
Thank you once again for sharing. These have been such incredible stories and memories that you have all brought to fruition. All these memories kind of linger with each of us. Like James, I grew up in a restaurant myself. I used to try to assign homework to our regular customers. Didn't know necessarily what I was doing, but I thought I was doing long division properly in second grade. Probably not. But that's the legacy and that's the story for many of us. Our parents came over, or we ourselves came over under immense circumstances. My father came over through a tunnel, right? He came through a tunnel. He came through Canada with a couple of his friends, and they went to the California Kitchen, if anyone remembers that, near Lawrence and Western. He also used to work at the Marianne's Bakery with a bit of his older family, and that's who brought him in. The Greeks helped the Greeks, and he was able to work, and at 27, he opened his first shop. He opened a donut shop, and the legacy just continued. He had restaurants and businesses ever since. This is a special memory because when you come to this museum, there's always a moment of unity when you come here, right? Whether we leave and come back, whether we hear and we have the friends that we have found here, it is a place of unity. And I hope in leaving you that we can all continue that unity together and come together to move the community forward. And with that, I leave you. If anyone else would like to share, I'm going to open the floor for mingling. The ladies in the back will be around if you'd like to scan any artifacts and share stories privately. There's plenty of food in the back. I believe we got more of the yummy macarons from Pan Hellenic. There will be standing docents in our Sweet Home Chicago exhibition if you would like to see that as well. Once again, Efkaristume, and thank you for being here tonight.